Ready when you are.
Hello, listeners, both of you. Hello, viewer. This is Matt. I hope you're all having a good week. Just wanted to chime in at the top of this episode with a few notes about what you're about to listen to. John and I are taking a couple of weeks off recording because we've both got some big work commitments on, but we didn't want to leave you hanging. So we have got the following episode, which is a little treat from the I'll Explain Later vaults. Back in 2019, we actually recorded an episode that we never put out. This was back in the days when we were doing one episode a month, which would cover 3 related or semi-related stories. So we recorded an episode, and then unfortunately my laptop came into contact with a cup of coffee fairly irretrievably, and we thought the episode was lost for good, and we put the stories back in the spreadsheet to re-review at a later time. Bit of a miracle, really. Discovered the audio on a backup hard drive a couple of months ago, and we've managed to pull it out, tidy it up, and present it for you here. So over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be hearing the 3 reviews that we recorded back then. The episode was loosely themed around bugs, critters, creepy crawlies, and we looked at Frontios, which is the episode you're about to hear. We looked at Gridlock, which will be next week, and then we looked at the Web Planet, which you'll be hearing in 2 weeks' time. It's sort of quite an interesting, weird, out-of-body experience to go back to listening to yourself back in 2019. John and I were messaging. We have no recollections, actually, of really watching Frontios, let alone talking about it. So it was interesting to go back and listen to this conversation. I think we might have been a little bit meaner and snarkier back in 2019. You may think we were a little better back in 2019. I'll leave that to you. Obviously, we weren't recording video back then, so it's an audio-only episode. Maybe one day Loose Cannon can do a slideshow reconstruction for it. But without further ado, this is our review from 2019 of Frontios. Enjoy. Okay, hello John.
Hi Matt.
And hello listeners.
Hey, both of you.
Both of you.
Hey.
Both of us, both of you. That joke never gets old.
No. How are you, Matt? You all right?
I'm all right. I experimented with your way of preparing for the podcast this morning.
The John West way.
The John West way. I watched all of these stories in a single sitting this morning, just before you came over, and I really don't know how you can live like this.
Well, I wouldn't call it a life. I don't think. I also chose the John West way, syncing this in short order. In as short order as you can, because it's a good 5 hours or so, Doctor Who. But
in a single sitting.
Yeah.
Well, should we crack straight on with reaping the benefits then of this approach?
Well, it's fresh.
Yeah, good.
I mean, it's very fresh. Not the material, all of it, but my take on it is fresh. This is a hot take in a way.
It is. Well, it was interesting seeing them all in one sitting because we have a
really brings out the themes that link them.
Well, the sheer. I mean, it's a real creature feature today in various orders. We have woodlice, we have cats, we have crabs.
Yes,
we have ants.
Yeah.
We have. Are they moths?
Yeah, sure.
Moths?
Yeah.
Some sort of grub.
They're not moths, are they? Because moths have coloured wings, and they have more the kind of fly,
black and white.
The fly like no, but more like the fly veiny see-through. Okay. That sounds weird, doesn't it?
Well, this is a preview of the quality content you can expect when we get to review the Web Planet later this episode. But yeah, a bit of a creepy crawly creature feature month this month.
Yeah.
But we'll start with Frontios.
Front up with Frontios.
We'll front up with Frontios, which is a story from Peter Davison's final season. Broadcast in... John, when was this broadcast?
From 26th of January through to the 3rd of February 1984. Twice weekly, 25-minute episodes, so 4 in total.
What a way to ring in the new year that was, 1984. So it's a 4-parter from Peter Davison's final season. It's him and Tegan and Turlo. And what happens in
the
Frontios?
Dream Team.
The Dream Team, as we always say. The TARDIS is drawn towards the colony planet Frontios by an inexplicable force.
That's a device they've never used before. I'm really... I was taken with that.
They pushed themselves with that. And arriving on Frontios, they discover that this is a colony. Or rather, sorry, the Doctor already knows that this is a colony with some of the last remaining members of humanity, presumably after the population of Earth has had to evacuate, thanks to some semi-unexplained disaster that Turlough starts explaining, and the Doctor hushes him up on it.
To do with the sun, though.
So, yes.
I mean, I think if you squint enough, there's probably enough continuity between this and Gridlock, which we're going to look at later.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, I made a note of that. We'll come on to that. But anyway, arriving on Frontios, they discover that things are not going well there. The surface of the planet is under continual bombardment, seemingly by meteorites, but in a sort of attack formation, which is kind of odd.
Yeah.
And everything is a bit grim and hard on Frontios. Everyone is working under the leadership of Plantagenet, who is played by Jeff Rawle, who I made a note of as a cut-price John Hurt.
You might think there's a degree of nominative determinism at work, being a Plantagenet who was born to rule. But yeah, it's not a name you come across very often. Certainly not as a first name.
No, his surname's unspecified, isn't it?
Well, no, presumably it's Revere.
Oh, Revere, Plantagenet Revere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most bid-meat thing that we've come across so far. I'm sure there'll be plenty more to come.
Is there any science aspect to this, Matthew?
There is science aspect, yes. Thank you for getting me back on track. There is ongoing investigations by the head of research. What's his name? Chief of Science? Science officer, Mr. Range, in order to determine how they can survive on this seemingly desolate planet.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem to have a military role because he is Mr. Range, isn't he? He's call him Mr. Raider, call him Mr. Wrong. Calling Mr. Range. And of course, but there is a military presence, isn't there?
Go on.
A brazen military presence.
Oh,
indeed.
I see. Yes, in the form of is he a captain? What's his rank?
I don't know, but because the leader's a captain, which seems oddly. I suppose he was captain of the colony ship, but it seems a bit low rent.
It feels like we're talking around the point here somewhat. Just basically, TARDIS crew turn up. It's end of the universe, end of the world. It's pretty grim. People keep getting sucked into the earth below. And the Doctor is determined to find out what's going on. And it turns out that beneath the surface of Frontios is a race of giant woodlice called the Tractators, who very intriguingly, Turlough, in a real emotional tour de force, reveals that he has encountered before on his home planet. So yes.
I didn't have them down as woodlice.
Oh, did you not?
No, I had them down as waddling mud shrimp.
Well, that's interesting because, the story was written by Christopher Bidmead, who we remember from the final Tom Baker season and into the first Peter Davison season. This was the final script that he wrote for the show. He wrote the story originally...
Well, it was good that he went out with a bang.
Yeah. He originally wrote the story without a monster in it at all, but having the insistence of the production team that he provide one, he wrote the Tractators on the basis, apparently, that his house was infested by woodlice at the time. So he thought, that'll do.
It's funny because that cut and shut element doesn't... It's funny, it doesn't come onto the screen at all.
So... We're snarking about this already. John, I'm presuming you didn't like this very much.
No, oddly, I did quite enjoy watching it.
Right.
But I don't think it's any good.
Yeah, okay.
And
talk us through this.
Well, I don't... It's not even that I... it's not even that I sort of think it's in a sort of so bad that it's good kind of category. I come into this era of Doctor Who with such low expectations that I think that plays a huge part in my response to it. And the idea of a colony that's gone wrong, it's one that I've always liked. I think the colony is quite well considered. The fact that you had a colony ship with quite a strict hierarchy, and they've been forced to maintain that by circumstances not going well in the colony. The fact that there is a kind of they've developed a sort of hereditary transfer of power seems quite interesting, because everything else is so chaotic that they almost can't consider anything other than that. The people who, the rets, they call them, the retrogrades, who leave the structure and try to sort of fend for themselves because there's a sort of
seemingly
anarchist.
acquire leather jackets and then ship on out.
The fact that towards the end they're actually independently looking for a leader figure is quite an interesting beat. And they alight upon the unnamed orderly.
Credited as Cockrell, though, isn't he, in the credits? Or?
Is he? I don't know whether he's orderly or the...
Anyway, the guy in the leather jacket.
Him. And they alight upon him because he doesn't get sucked down into the... Which unbeknownst to them is because the tractator, God, has been interrupted by the Doctor, but because he seemed to sort of withstand that, he's held up as a kind of leader figure.
A slightly messianic kind of way, weirdly, isn't it?
Yeah. Although interesting, and again, Christopher Bigby didn't have to do this, but it's interesting that he has that character then say, well, listen, I know I didn't want to be a leader, and then it turns out he doesn't need to be because Plantagenet is still alive. But there's kind of a recognition that actually we tried this every man for himself thing. It didn't work. They're looking for a leader. One has emerged, and even though he doesn't really want it, he's happy to kind of take that responsibility. And it kind of holds some hope as things resolve at the end that everyone can push in the right direction again at the end. But it feels quite evolutionary. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel unearned that would happen. So that's quite good. I think this is...
that is, sorry, it is interesting actually, so much the sense that, I mean, we've seen so many stories in Doctor Who where there is this kind of community conflict among one of these colonies where you've got the science people and the military people and the people who are trying to sort of get on with it. And it is quite interesting actually in this story that the lines are not so cleanly drawn in this. It's just more that the ongoing pressure cooker situation means it's all come a bit unglued.
Yeah.
As opposed to everyone is in their rival factions pointing guns at each other.
No, indeed.
And people move between those different spaces as the situation evolves.
Yeah,
which I thought I agree with you on that actually. I thought it was a slightly nicer portrait of one of these communities than you often get. And
also even though Brazen is portrayed as a typical kind of
be silent.
Yeah, by the numbers military, consistently throughout his bark is worse than his bite. So even when the soldier, the orderly, whatever his name is, even when he leather jacket guy, when he turns against them and decides to go off on his own, rather than execute him, he gives him a few days, or lets him take a few days rations and says, well, he'll learn. But he doesn't just sort of make him an example and shoot him. Likewise, when he puts Mr. Range on trial, as the facts change and the evidence changes through the trial, his approach to him changes as well. He was worried about his position building up this kind of shadow dossier of unexplained deaths. But as it emerges with Tegan's intervention that actually there's a really good reason for all of what's going on, he changes his mind. He changes his mind about the Doctor. So even though he feels that he needs rhetorically to be very sort of brusque and gruff,
he's quite pragmatic.
He's actually quite pragmatic under the hood, which makes the characterization of him a bit better than the kind of similar military figures you might see around this era and indeed throughout other eras. So I just feel like that little society is quite well drawn. Obviously, there are only 2 female members of the society, which, colour me heteronormative, but I do worry about the longevity of the
the last outpost of humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I would have taken a few more women on board. But look, no, I think that as a kind of slice of society, and also what's at the heart of some of the tension is really not the kind of alien threat. It's misunderstanding and secrecy as the enemy of progress. So the fact that they haven't spoken, even though there isn't, as you say quite rightly, and this is the strength of the piece, that kind of horrible distinction between the civilian and the military, which is so easy to do in this kind of dystopian thing. The fact that people don't feel that they can openly discuss. Captain Revere takes a lot of the blame for not revealing what's really going on at an earlier stage. Even Mr. Range doesn't talk openly about his suspicions.
Death's unaccounted for.
Yeah,
isn't
exactly.
It? Yeah.
And actually, if they had discussed those things at an earlier stage, they might have been in a better position to face up to the reality of where they were. But for the benefit of the people, those things are kept secret, and so that misunderstanding and secrecy is the enemy of progress is something that I think is quite well explored. So I didn't hate this. I thought it was actually quite decent. Certainly quite decent for the era. But you'll notice that I didn't really mention in all the things I liked about it the Doctor or the companions, and it does feel like the kind of alien mud shrimp woodlice people, it does feel awfully bolted on. It's not what Bidmead's interested in.
No, I mean, it's interesting actually, because we talked a bit about Christopher Bidmead last month when we were looking at Full Circle with Lewis, and he raised the very good point, I thought, that you see, so obviously Bidmead was the script editor on that, and he said that that's a very good example of how the script writing process can really work, in that Bidmead brings a lot of rigour to a imaginative but potentially underdeveloped script from a very, very young first-time writer. And here, I mean, I think it's undeniable throughout all of his contributions as writer and script editor, Bidmead is a man of ideas. He's excited by ideas, some of which are on the sort of more pointy-headed, sciencey end of the spectrum. But I think he is a very, very thoughtful writer. What I think is both interesting and kind of goes wrong in this is that I think there's a lot to like in this. I think there's some decent ideas. It's a more, as you say, it's a more sophisticated setup than we're used to, perhaps, in terms of the Conlist base. I think also it's a good little mystery that I think is teased out in quite a decent pace. I mean, there's a steady clip of revelations in each episode that kind of move the story forward.
I'd agree with that. The structure and pacing is pretty good. I'm not sure that the final plan of the
Tractators.
I'm not sure that the final plan
piloting Frontios around using their own gravitational. I mean, it's quite B-movie.
I'm not sure that
I think the Daleks tried to do that in the past as well.
I'm not sure that plan or how they achieve it by picking off these people one by one necessarily makes a whole host of sense.
No.
But the revelation of it is well structured.
It yields some good moments, like the cliffhanger to the end of episode 3, where the digging machine sort of emerges around the corner
Revere's
with
head.
Captain Revere's head in it.
Yeah.
Is genuinely good. And
the
came as a surprise to me as well. I was like, oh, shit.
The makeup is really good on him because he does look like a cadaver.
The other thing is that I think there's a lot of really good dialogue in this, and some of it's really funny. Like there's some good jokes in here. I'm going to be a tiny bit more generous than you, perhaps, to Peter Davison, because I think he gets quite a good read on this, and I think he's given some good stuff to do. The problem is that I think a script that is full of ideas and I think some very good lines and some good bits is just put through the incredibly one-note ringer of what I consider the Doctor Who production process to be at this point. They
just added the grim filter and that's it.
That's exactly it. I think in the way that the last series of Tom Baker's era is actually sort of the first series of the Peter Davison era as we understand it. This last season of the Peter Davison era is actually the first season of the Colin Baker era as we know it. There's this air of kind of, even where the script doesn't quite demand it, there's this air of macho futility to everything, that we're all going to die and we're going to get there by shouting at each other. and I think it doesn't allow for any light or shade, which means that there's this
plenty of shade perhaps.
Yeah, plenty of shade. Yeah, it's all shade, no light. There's this sort of consistent tone of just grim macho desperation to this, which butts up against good bits. So, for example, the scene where the Doctor is... So here's a really good example of where it's gone wrong, where it could have been so much better. The scene where Tegan is held captive by the Tractator's purple beam thing, and the Doctor's trying to get himself out of it by pretending that she's a robot that he's picked up for cheap, and he says, I got it for cheap because the walk's a bit funny, not to mention the accent, but it's really good for keeping appointments and having things around. Imagine that scene being played by John Pertwee and Katie Manning, and it would be a hoot. Like, it would be really funny. You can see them both playing off it. And the two things that go wrong is one, that the script, the tone of the production doesn't allow for any of the bounce that really requires for that stuff to land.
Yeah.
And second, and I think this is, we've been very critical of the TARDIS teams certainly of the Davison era. And you realise, the penny drop for me, actually, what's gone really wrong with this team is that Tegan and Turlough are so unbelievably stupid. And where that comes across is in a scene like that, and actually throughout this, whenever the Doctor's trying a bit of subterfuge to sort of side with, looking like he's siding with the Tractators in order to nudge something forward, or pretending to go along with Brazen when, he's waving guns around, Tegan and Turlough's instantaneous reaction is to look horrified at how the Doctor's turned traitor on them, or to say, but what are you doing? How can you be helping him with this? Yeah. Whereas if you compare that to the scene that we looked at in The Curse of Paladin last month, where the Doctor and Jo have arrived in the situation, and the Doctor immediately starts pretending to be the Earth delegate, and Jo picks it up and runs with it, and then banters back and forth because she knows what's going on. Tegan's been travelling with the Doctor for 2.5 years at this point, and she just still thinks, "Oh, why is he behaving like this?"
We also see that when Barbara is having to deal with the accusations that the Doctor has let them down in the Web Planet.
Yeah,
and again, she just refuses. She can't get her head around the idea. She doesn't actually understand what's happened at that point, but she refuses to engage with it. No, I agree. There's just not realistic human dynamics between these three characters.
It's not even that. It's that I think there's no indication that they have ever understood each other as people.
No.
They don't seem to be friends. They don't seem to like each other. There's no chemistry that suggests why they would continue to spend time with each other. And obviously, there's the point of the next story is Resurrection of the Daleks that we've looked at in the past, and that ends with Tegan walking out saying it stopped being fun. I see no indication that it was ever fun for her. I think she's, okay, that's a dramatic engine as well. The sort of unwilling passenger, sort of tormented by this traumatic experience. But there are just a few occasions on this episode where, the Doctor's trying to improvise something in order to get them out, and Tegan's like, well, what are you doing? What's this going to achieve? And I'm just like, oh, come on, you've been here enough times.
Just to stay with the companions for a second.
Well, we're going to talk about Turlough, aren't we?
Yeah, I feel really mean saying this, but
go on.
If you're going to have as one of the main beats within your piece, okay, so a lot of this is going to be focused on Turlough's trauma, and the fact that he's being forced to relive the trauma of his own planet having been attacked by the Tractators. You and to have sort of PTSD style episodes and to be in and out of kind of really being in the room.
That has him literally dribbling all over himself at one point.
Oh yeah, he froths at the mouth.
Yeah.
You really need the dialogue and the performance to sell that. Now, I don't think that Bidmead's done a bad, or even perhaps Hayward with the polish. That's a phrase I've never thought I'd say. It's landed okay on the page, I suspect. Strixon just can't.
It's not a bad idea.
It is if you've got Strixon in the role, because he's just too limited an actor to pull this off.
Now, I'm going to chime in with a counterpoint to that, not from my own notes, but from the box. I'm wielding the Frontios DVD here. So this is just from the liner notes of the DVD. Performances here reinforce the feeling of impending disaster, with highlights including Davison's doctor becoming increasingly frantic and unpredictable, and Mark Strickson masterfully unveiling the horrific nature of what is lurking under Frontios' surface.
I mean, horrific is a word.
I don't know how many copies this sold.
Horrific is a word I would use while describing his performance.
I mean, he's. You've said it before. He's a fantastically limited actor, isn't he?
He is. Great ambassador for the show.
He just emotes in. I don't know.
It's just not good enough.
No.
To kind of pull that off, and it's such a central part of it. Also, just his decisions are his. I mean, I know that he's always been a bit of a scaredy cat, and this is kind of an opportunity for him to really confront his fears and then, build up his courage or show his real mettle. But he manages to be sort of. He manages not
even
really
more camp than Tom.
Yeah, he manages to. I
thought that scene it's really bad. It's meant to be such a traumatic moment for him where he's reliving it, and I was pissing myself.
Yeah, I know.
It's really funny when he goes for it,
and it's just
it's quite mean, isn't it?
And also when he says, right, it'll be a chance whether I go back into the caves or not, and he's got the 2 coins, and it's meant to be that in one hand there is a coin, in one hand it's empty, but of course they both have coins, so he was always going to go back down.
Yeah.
It's so obviously signposted. It's cringeworthy. Quite apart from the fact that he makes completely the wrong decision, because by going back down into the depths to help them, he's left poor Leslie Dunlop. Is it Leslie Dunlop?
It is Leslie Dunlop.
He left poor Leslie May to December Dunlop on her own, and I just think that's unacceptable.
With seemingly just 2 pita breads for sustenance as well.
I know. So that's bad.
Yes. But he's not the campest thing in it, because this has also got the Gravis in it as well, who's the lead tractator, who do you know what? I think the tractators are not necessarily a terrible idea for a monster. I quite like the fact that their thing is that they are able to manipulate gravity. That's quite interesting.
Can you just walk me through what their plan was? So they would pick off the colonists one by one so that they could pilot their mining machines.
Yes.
I mean, they seem fairly advanced. Surely a mining machine. I don't. But it doesn't seem like it would need a human operator.
No, that is no. So obviously the idea is that they seemingly are mining this sort of perfectly symmetrically balanced network of tunnels through the base of the planet, so they can amplify their own gravitational abilities in order to move the planet around independent of the gravitational forces already acting on it. No, I don't think it's immediately clear why, because they say it needs a mind to operate it, doesn't it? Which is something that we've seen before, and we'll see again in a sense with Revelation of the Daleks the following year. Is sort of that idea of the sort of the computer's not good enough. You need to plug a human into it, but yeah, it's not really justified by a digging machine. I mean, it's like
no.
You just need fuel, don't you? And
yeah,
I don't know.
It just seems like a more sensible plan would have been sort of, I don't know, just saying, hey guys, we can build some metro tunnels for you, but we need a driver or 2.
Yeah.
And then revealing their actual purpose at the end or something. I mean, I hate doing alternative plot lines, but it just, like I say, the mystery is quite well worked, but the revelation of what they're actually doing just seems a bit half-baked.
I think it sort of justifies itself by that cliffhanger in episode 3. I mean, it's basically the only reason I can sort of work out that element of the plan is there is so you can have that moment where Captain Revere, who, in one of the few bits of design flair I would say that we actually see in this serial /era, I like those posters of him, those sort of sort of single colour poster prints of him that you see everywhere all over the colony. So that when he actually rolls out and he's that's his head and face. It's quite a moment.
And you are strongly led to the idea that it is just his head.
Yes,
as well. That there's not the rest of his body, sort of.
Although there is, isn't there? There's don't they pull him out of it? And he's,
do they?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not. Okay.
Oh no, I think you're right. Oh, okay. Fine. Well, whatever.
But none of
I preferred the idea that it was just his head.
Just his head. None of the tractators communicate apart from the Gravis, their leader, who is very chatty, isn't he?
Urbane.
Urbane, yes. To the point that it's again one of the scenes that I quite liked is when towards the end when they've found all the different bits of the TARDIS console room. And by the way, that sort of version of the TARDIS console room with the rocks jagging through it in a really sort of disconnected, fragmented way looks so much better and more interesting, I think, than the set actually looks. I don't know, maybe they should have stuck with that going forward. But the bit where the Gravis is wandering around the console looking at all the buttons like a sort of very excited teacher on a trip to the science museum or something, admiring all the stuff, and his little hands start going, his fingers start wiggling with excitement. But yeah, he's a very chatty monster, isn't he?
Quite cultured as well.
Yes.
Sort of Martin Gravis.
Martin Gravis.
Of whom more later.
More later, yeah. Yeah, and if you can tell me actually which one he was in the Web Planet, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think...
yeah, go on, sorry. You quite liked them.
Yeah, I quite like... I mean, they look stupid, and there is... no one knows what to do in order to direct them. So that's the thing. I mean, it's basically... there's some good ideas in this. There are some good lines. It is just put through this one note, like it's directed with absolutely no sense of light and shade.
No,
the music is one note, militaristic sort of thudding all the way through.
It's that really typical Paddy Kingsland sort of panpipes, but with Marshall snares.
Yes,
it's just
really someone
odd.
gave him a Lindrum for Christmas. He's clearly keen to use it.
Yeah,
it's
not great. It doesn't add anything.
No, and then just everything. It's not directed with any sort of sensitivity. But it's a shame, really, because I actually weirdly noted down more dialogue in this than I would have than I would normally do. I think of a story of this era. As a weapon of war, the TARDIS is about as offensive as a chicken vol au vent. was a good line.
That's the kind of... That feels to me like a kind of Bidmead hangover from some of the Tom Baker whimsy. Ditto the all the
probably would have been better coming from Tom Baker, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and in the same way that we have Chekhov's hat stand, which is introduced at the beginning with him just bouncing out of the room at the back going, "Are any of you hat people?" Which sounds for all the world like a Tom Baker line. Not
and also is so uncharacteristic of this era. It's sort of weirdly, yes, it sounds very Tom Baker-ish because that's the kind of sort of bouncing around sort of freewheeling stuff that he would do, and often it would be disconnected. Whereas here, for any of the characters to talk to each other about anything other than the matter at hand, is obviously teeing it up for future significance.
Well, yeah, hence Chekhov's hat stand, because it becomes vital as a thing, as something that's confused for a weapon later on. And
then becomes a holy totem at the end.
Yes, what I quite liked is too strong, but I did sort of grimly chuckle when even the Doctor, as Davison said, I think that joke's got a little old now. with Turlough wielding the big hat stand as if it was a weapon. I thought, it was always a bad idea. But maybe it was kind of a meta attempt to justify what was always a really bad idea. I don't know.
But there's also, I mean, a lot of references, and again, this is looking forward, I think, some decades to the Earth is hungry, the hungry Earth, and referencing that phrase a lot in a story where people are being sucked into the ground by a sinister force working underneath the surface of the planet. Let's definitely agree that when Chris Chibnall steals, he steals from the best down the line. But then there's a line that's almost thrown away, where is it? It might. I can't even remember who. I noted down the line and didn't write down who said it, but I think it's Brazen, where he says, "Frontios buries its own dead," as a reference to people who die and then are sucked through the earth. And I thought, given the situation at hand, that's a really good line, and it sort of almost just disappears into the ether. But that's the thing. It's directed in a way that suggests that no one actually read the script. It's just they said desperate situation at end of the world, and Ron Jones went, right, yep, I got this.
Yeah, I do sort of I agree with you. I think that the what really grabs me about this is kind of a lot of that is so promising, and there are little flourishes like that work. But then they're directed through a prism where the stuff and also just the characters, the actors we have, when the few jokes are added in, they don't quite. It doesn't quite.
Well, no one knows what
together.
to do with them.
No, and yeah, I just feel that it's somehow. Look, it's better than a lot of the stuff in this run,
but it's just chopped up by the same meat grinder.
Yeah.